Alright, hello everyone. If you've been on this channel for some time, you know that we've been working on a video to cover the information from God of War Ragnarok and how we think it affects the power scaling of the series. We had also planned to cover the information in God of War 2018 at some point after the Dante vs. Kratos video, in which we explain how the God of War Greek Pantheon exists. If you haven't seen that video, link will be in the description. We decided that we're going to do that and just give a full breakdown on how the cosmology in God of War works in general, kind of invalidating that section, not important. With me today, I will have my co-host Mangler. Say hello, Mangler.
Hello, hello.
So, in order to explain this thoroughly, what? Would you like to ask
That's
something?
all I got. Go ahead.
So in order to explain this thoroughly, we'll be splitting this up into two separate videos. Video number one is going over the topic of the cosmology and how it's laid out. Video number two will go over all the information provided by God of War Ragnarok directly. Video number one will be split into a handful of sections. First, we'll be going over the layout of the God of War Pantheons. Next, we'll be covering all the information regarding the Norse Pantheon's layout. For this reason, we will not be covering the God of War Pantheon specifically in the first section, but rather the pantheons in the God of War world as a whole in the second section. Shortly afterward, in our third
That was
section,
that,
what?
that was supposed to be the Greek pantheon. That was referring. You said God of War pantheon. That was supposed to be Greek pantheon. Just pointing that out for anyone who's going to ask.
All right, I think they get the gist. That's fine. Shortly afterward, in our third section, we'll be going over the issues with God of War's versus community's usage with author statements and using Word of God for this verse in general. Lastly, in the fourth section, we'll just be covering our final thoughts on the whole process, and we'll be giving a scan count to explain how much information was provided in the video. Mangler will start us off with the first section, going over an explanation of the God of War cosmology.
Yes. One moment. So this first part of the video is going to cover how the God of War cosmology is supposed to exist, rather than like what power scalars argue to be. I'll start off by first explaining how the pantheons function according to the authors and source material. And then I will follow up by directly addressing various misconceptions regarding the cosmology, much like what was done with the previous God of War videos on this channel, which will, again, be linked in the description. So, first, we'll begin by directly explaining how the Pantheons exist in the God of War universe. First, I'm going to start explaining this through a set of about 4 different points that I want to cover. The first one being the God of War universe is a single existing universe wherein everything comprises of the belief systems, the interpretations of myth, creation stories, etc., the pantheons, is simply separated by geography. Number 2 is that the pantheons are separated directly by geographical regions of the planet, such as countries or likewise land masses, and not by spatial and or temporal borders. Number 3 is that or number 2, I guess, was actually the representation of the aforementioned beliefs listed in number 1, up from a mythological perspective in verse rather than a literal scientific or science fictional depiction of the beliefs mentioned above. Number 3 will be the geographical region separation. Number 4 will be a discussion on the myths/interpretations that exist within the pantheon, not always being one-to-one with their original source material, and like specific elements and details of that source material can be and have been changed to fit a specific story and narrative interpretation for the God of War series specifically. By the end of this section, I expect that I will provide the necessary amount of information to meet my burden of proof. Hopefully, I will convince most people watching this video of these positions. Before we begin, I'll point out right now that several of these pieces of evidence that I'm going to see here, that you're going to see, that I'm going to present, are explained in combination with one another, such as the pantheons, myths, geography, or sizes and or spaces between pantheons. So it seems as though I'm going to repeat myself multiple different times. You're going to see a lot of the same statements multiple different times. Just putting you guys on notice now, this will be the case. All right, with that out of the way, let's begin. Point 1 for section 1 is going over the God of War universe being a single existing universe, simply separated by geography. So the first point should be covering a direct question that is asked by Corey Barlog on Twitter from a fan, where he's asked about Midgard by a fan, attempting to figure out how much of the God of War universe it takes up, as evidenced by his statements. He asks, quote, "Is Midgard in the game just the Earth or the entire universe?" Corey responds with this answer: Midgard is Scandinavia on Earth. The other realms are parallel dimensions that occupy the same space. He is then asked if quote, the Greek gods say we created the universe, and then the Norse gods say we did, along with all the other different myths who have different creation stories, which of them is true? To which Corey gives this response, all of them. They all have carved out their own piece of history. When talking about the, quote, universe, though, they are, in my mind, referring to the universes that they themselves have dominion over. The greater, quote, actual universe has yet to be explored. So he confirms here that the quote-unquote universe in this context is referring to the gods' existing assumption of what their domains are. This is indicated by the following sentences wherein he says, quote, the greater actual, quote, universe has yet to be explored, meaning the gods are merely controlling a landmass that is interpreted to be a universe, or at least all of existence as they understand it to be. He also confirms Midgard is located where Scandinavia would be on the world map. I know he also mentions the realms. The realms are parallel dimensions, but that's not relevant for this section. It doesn't actually support any evidence of the position, nor in favor of it, as it's unrelated. It's also not going to matter for the purposes of the later sections. But for the second source, I'm going to provide a Kotaku article, which I believe covers an interview where someone had asked Corey Barlog a bunch of different questions regarding some of the Norse Easter eggs. The interviewer, which I believe goes by the name of Kirk, says, there's a scene in Tyr's Vault where you see the symbols of these various gods, and one of them is the Egyptian symbol, which a lot of people know from having played Assassin's Creed Origins. Is there anything to that? Are there any other pantheons in this universe that creators might go explore? Barlog says, oh, totally. I've always looked at this universe like our own world. The geography separates the cultural mythologies. The cultural mythologies are stories of 0 point to present day. These are the births and origins of these cultures. So the Norse mythology exists in Scandinavia, simultaneously, across the world. The Mayan mythology also has its origins, right? These are cultural stories about how they explain the birth of their culture. And I think, as I look at the whole world, that each of these gods have their own domains, right? The same way that countries had their own domains. Kirk says, and their own special fighting moves and their own special weapons. It's like, yeah, and their own special moves and their own DLC. And some other guy named Jason Schrader basically says, and their own upgrade trees. Barlog responds, right. Yeah, but it's all a consistent single universe. As we start to look at these things, these little bits here and there, like Tyr had this connection to a lot of other pantheons. And there's reference in Norse mythology of gods interacting with the Roman gods. It's very small, it's very minimal in their connections, but it shows that there was an awareness. And whether that awareness was post the time where they were moving pagans away from the pagan religion by having the mythology slightly modified to kind of a move towards Christian religion, I think it's interesting to think that in all these times there are these connections to every one of these locations. So Barlog confirms to what I'm talking about here, except just a little bit more blatantly. He says the geography separates the mythologies, and it looks at the whole world that each of these gods have their domains, right? The same way the countries have their domains. This would indicate that pantheons are indeed country-sized, and the belief systems of the people are simply them just assuming their pantheons to be larger because they interpret it to be, quote, their world. He also says later that it's a single consistent universe. So it's all one universe existing on one planet with countries that represent mythologies existing on said planet separated from another by geography. It's actually quite simple, really. Then a third one comes from a Twitter statement that Bruno Velasquez has provided to us, which he is asked by a fan a series of questions. He's asked if the infinite timelines are valid for Greek mythology, to which Bruno responds with this, not sure what you mean by infinite timelines. Fan says, the Nords saw infinite futures, referring to the infinite timeline stated in the God of War's new card game. So are there such infinite futures in the Greek universe, since each region is a separate universe? I will be grateful to answer. Bruno stated this in response. Sorry if I cannot recall a place in the game where the Nords were mentioned in 2018 or where infinite futures were talked about. One thing I do want to clarify is this concept of universes. There aren't multiple universes in God of War, only regional divides. This fan then proceeded to provide a detailed explanation from their understanding of the verse to Bruno. Bruno simply responded with this, I see this is from the card game. Well, I guess I should give you a concrete answer, but that one is a bit more complex and best left to our amazing writing team. They have all the secrets. So what we can determine from this conversation is multiple things. First, Bruno confirms there aren't multiple universes in God of War, only regional divides. In response to a fan stating that each region is a separate universe, only now we have a direct confirmation from Bruno rather than just Corey. Secondly, this technically also confirms some information about Ragnarok, but I'll get to that in the second video. For the fourth source that I provided, I believe we have another Twitter statements where Bruno was asked a question in Spanish about a pantheon from a friend. This fan specifically listed another question where he was asking if Ares visited the Egyptian pantheon, to which Bruno responded, makes sense since all the myths and lands coexist in the God of War universe. Since this was a statement that was referenced in like a link, this person asked Bruno in Spanish if the word universe and does the word universe mean that the pantheons are universes or are they countries? And Bruno responded by stating the following: when I said God of War universe, referring to the question about the Egyptian pantheon, I meant a single universe where the pantheons coexist separated by geographical regions. This would mean the God of War universe is still a singular universe separated by geography, and that you can travel between the pantheons just by walking or any conventional means of travel. Moving on to a few more final author statements, and then we'll finish off this first point of section 1. I believe next we have the example that is provided about the Hubble telescope imagery from the 2019 GDC conference. So at about, I want to say 5:10 to 5:55, the timestamp will be in the video for anyone who wants to check it out. Corey Barlog uses the same explanation here as what's stated above with the Hubble telescope imagery as an analogous example that'll also be linked there for how the pantheons function with respect to one another. Quote, but what I would talk about was the idea that all the mythologies of the world are kind of like this Hubble telescope image. They are like galaxies, individually separated throughout a complete universe. And the world is a universe. And all the mythologies are sort of origin stories of various cultures throughout the world, beginning at the beginning of time and stretching all the way out. So at any given time, all the mythologies exist together concurrently, and they're simply separated by geography. So this is important because some people have the conception that, hey, Kratos at the end of God of War 3 destroyed the world. Well, he destroyed what they believed the world was in Greece, which was their world. Everybody believed their own world was the own world. In fact, we still believe that today. So in this GDC conference, he explains his position for the layout of the God of War planet years before his tweet, actually. Originally at the time of 27, this is originally conscripted at 2013, but we obviously didn't learn about it until 2019, the same year God of War Ascension was made. He uses the Hubble telescope imagery as an analogy to explain the mythologies are supposed to exist within that stock photo image for the Hubble telescope. He says that the universe is, quote, the world, whilst his hands are wrapped around in a spherical manner, indicating that the world, and by extension the universe, in this context, is referring to the God of War planet. He then says all the mythologies at any given time exist together and are simply separated by geography. This would indicate that you can just travel the borders of various geographical regions of the God of War planet to reach these pantheons. You don't need interstellar travel or any sort of space-time portals to get from one another. You can just walk there if need be. He then also points out how people had this idea that Kratos destroyed the world at the end of God of War 3, and then mentions he only destroyed, quote, what the Greeks interpreted to be their world, which was Greece. And I quote, everyone believes their own world to be their world. This just means the people in the God of War verse operate under the assumption that their pantheon is the true origin story of existence, and they simply assume it to be along with its size. These statements are also mentioned in a GameSpot interview that he had in 2016. This one will also be linked in the description at about 3:27, 4:08, or 3 minutes, 27 seconds to 4:08 in this Gamescom video. Not the GameSpot interview, where he basically talks about how the pantheons in the God of War planet, again, are separated from each other using the same analogy for the Hubble telescope. And the interview asked him, so is this a continuation of the Kratos that we played, or is this just a new incarnation? Are you talking about that yet? This is continuation. So it's like, the way I see it is that the mythologies are kind of like that Hubble telescope image of all the galaxies. And the interviewer was like, oh, the ultra deep field. And he's like, yeah. So the image shows the universe with all its individual galaxies. Each galaxy is like a representation of mythology, sort of wrapped in around the Earth, and at any given moment, all these mythological belief systems existed. You know, they all sort of deal with the creation myth around the regions, just separated by geography. So at the height of some of these mythological belief systems or different time periods, a lot of them kind of aligned with a single point in time. So Corey's statements here in this video are basically what's mentioned at the GDC conference I just covered. Key differences being here that he directly states that if you wrap the galaxies within the Hubble telescope image around the planet, at any given moment, all the mythological belief systems existed. So he just confirmed that the pantheons are countries here. Again, as the galaxies are to a universe, so countries would be to a planet. And he specifically mentions they wrap around the Earth and they're separated by geography. A reasonable assertion would just be to say that they're countries, because countries also wrap around the planet and are also separated by geography. They also confirmed to be existing at a single point in time. I know some people might point out that this might be referring to the time periods that they're supposed to be or not supposed to be taking place within man's history. However, he's usually referring to them all existing in a single universe. The Kotaku article I brought up earlier makes it clear why that isn't the case, and why he's that he isn't referring to different universes existing, but rather a single universe in total. Then we have a seventh source provided by Matt Sophos, where he's asked a question from a fan on Twitter in regards to how the Greek and the Norse are separate in another dimension or their universe. Matt responds with a clarification question to ask if the person is referring to, quote, our universe, or if the myths are separated from each other. The person responds with the latter, to which Matt Sophos was stated, I just realized that I was never answered this. I think they exist in the same world mythically rather than a sci-fi dimensionality. This would indicate to us that the pantheons are not separated by the beliefs of those who are born, are separated by the beliefs of those who are born under the myths, not by a space-time barrier, separated universes, or any kind of continuum. He is then asked if that's the case, how is the Norse myth created, since the Greek myth have primordials that created the universe? Matt responds by saying they all just sort of exist simultaneously. Man's history marches on linearly, but the myths and interpretations are all valid. This would just indicate what we see in the pantheons is just an assertion of the myths existing in reality to some degree, and that the history of mankind moves forward regardless of this. He says they all exist, quote, simultaneously, which would be a reference to them being separated geographically rather than spatially and or temporally, as I already pointed out why they aren't. As he already pointed out, why they're not separated in the sci-fi sense. So, going on to section 2, just to review, this information was just provided just to show that all the pantheons do in fact exist in the same universe. They're confirmed to be the same universe by multiple developers, multiple times in each. They're confirmed to be exclusively separated by geography, which would mean they occupy the same physical space. They're confirmed not to be separated in the dimensional sense, only in the mythical kind. Now, on to point 2. The pantheons' existence are just a representation of the beliefs of their respective people, pulled from the same cultures in our world, from a mythological perspective in verse. It is not intended to be a literal scientific or science fictional depiction of said beliefs. So first, we have a Twitter statement that is provided via Bruno, or I guess with his mentions. Someone has asked him why the new God of War game contradicts all the previous games' lore, to which he responded with, that's a loaded question. What parts of these do you feel that it contradicts? This fan asked him about the primordials creating the universe, whom is the Earth, either being Gaia or Ymir, and does Atlas actually hold up the world? He was curious about the cosmology since God of War 4 expanded on it. Bruno responds with this by saying, quote, all mythologies exist at once in the world of God of War. All creation stories are valid because all the gods and mythologies are separated geographically. When Kratos destroyed the world, quote unquote, the world in God of War 3, he destroyed the Greek world, not the whole world. This is how it works. But Bruno was asked again if the primordials created the universe and if Atlas is holding up the Earth. If Atlas is holding up the Earth is correct, and in reference to the primordials, he basically responds with exactly the same answer as before. He says, quote, they created the Greek world. The Norse world was created by the Norse gods. Atlas holds up the Greek world as well. When this fan asks him what he means by world, either Greece or the universe in Greek mythology, Bruno responds with this. Yes, everything related to the Greek world falls under the Greek pantheon and creation stories. Everything is based on geography. This is how the mythologies can coexist in one world. Side note, there's some irrelevant stuff about Kratos fighting the primordials and gods and stuff in this little Twitter thread. I just thought I'd let you know that I omitted that intentionally because it has nothing to do with what's being discussed here. I am going to point it out still, though. Continuing on. In every example of these questions, Bruno just confirms the Greek myths are just the pantheon. Their interpretations exist because of geography. The validity of the stories is only there because of geography. and that everything is directly related to geography. The Greek world is just what the Greeks interpret to be their world from their universe. And another question from Twitter, provided by a fan, that asks Matt Sophos a similar question to the one we just covered, in order to understand how contradictions between the myths work. He gives an example by stating that Poseidon was always stated to be the god of all seas, and Njord, I can't pronounce that, is the god of the seas in God of War 4 too. Maybe each pantheon is within its own realm. That's my theory, at least. Despite the fact that this person clearly doesn't know how to answer questions, evident by the fact that they just asked an additional question followed by their initial question before it was answered, and then asserting a statement, Matt Sophos actually answers this by saying, without getting too deep into it, it's kind of like the combination of geography and systems. Ultimately, they all sort of exist simultaneously, and none of them are particularly happy with Kratos' role. As Matt puts it, it's just a combination of what the people believe in their region around the area, along with where the area is located. That leads to the statements like the ones mentioned about Poseidon. Many people in the Pantheons operate under the assumption that their reality is the even exists, or at least the one that matters, aka Poseidon is the god of all seas because we interpreted him to be the god of all seas. Now, the third one, I believe, comes from another YouTube interview with Corey. Timestamps are 5:30, 5:45. Barlog basically is talking about the reasons behind Kratos going to the Egyptian Pantheon, and he basically says the Egyptian Pantheon isn't far enough away for Kratos to escape his past. So he says, Egyptian was always fascinating to me. He sort of had a geography problem. If he's going to want to get away from his past, it's not far enough. And then in sort of the 9-minute timestamp, Corey asks how the Pantheons, Corey establishes how the Pantheons exist, how they started on the God of War planet and whatnot. And he says, I always loved the idea on the planet. Since the beginning of time, all these cultures have their origin stories, and geography is separating all of them so that concurrently, all these mythologies are going on, right? There isn't one that says, this is how this was, and this is how this culture was brought up, and this is how this one, it isn't that this is how this one was. It was, this is how this culture was brought up, and this culture in this way. Who knows if they were to crisscross and have some crazy Norse and Egyptian and Mayan Justice League of people. So this is just him, again, providing an example of how the Pantheons exist on the planet and how they're separated from one another. And then, again, we just have examples. I would just cite the Hubble telescope image, again, from the GDC conference, because it's just Corey basically explaining, again, that people in the Pantheons believe their main reality to be the one that exists, as he points out that Kratos destroyed the Greek world, so what the Greeks interpreted to be this world. So I think this information that I provided is enough to prove that the Pantheons do in fact just exist as a survey of these people's beliefs. They're a representation of how the people in the regions feel like they're the only people in the world that really matter when it's only shown to be inside of a single pantheon. It seems to be the case that the vast majority of these pantheons, regardless of the knowledge of each other, simply don't care whether or not they're the only ones around. They just assert they're the dominant force in reality anyway. This is also pretty consistent with an actual interpretation of real-world beliefs, as most belief systems refuse to accept any knowledge that threatens the basis of their beliefs. Sometimes they'll even try to incorporate it into the narrative of their reality by putting a spin on it. Then we go into section 3. Section 3, or I guess point 3, before we go. Point 3, we'll cover like the second to last one before we move into section 2 with the Norse Pantheon. This is just explaining that pantheons are just directly separated by geographical regions rather than by spatial or temporal barriers. I want to point out that God of War has multiple examples of various individuals in the God of War universe physically being able to travel from pantheon to pantheon, usually by walking. God of War novel, the scan listed and shown on the screen. This establishes that Ares is able to do this quite easily, as Zeus just points out, he's in that blasted Egyptian desert. I referenced this earlier with a Bruno statement where he was asked on Twitter. This is the same scan. Another one is Kratos basically walking to the Egyptian pantheon of the Fallen Gods comic after a little bit of sailing. It just takes him many days to travel from one place to another, maybe like a week or two. There's another one that's provided from God of War Ascension. which is just some random unnamed person that we have no information about. He's able to travel from the Egyptian pantheon to the Greek pantheon to see the oracle as an indicated fact that he just came from the land of the pharaohs. And then finally, we have a Game Informer interview with Matt Sophos, where he is asked at 36, 34 to 38, 39, whether or not Midgard extends all the way to the Greek pantheon of all the other places on Earth. Then this is his response to that question. He says, in my mind, and keep in mind in this context, he also has like another person there. So he's responding to them when he says, and you can contradict. In my mind, and you can contradict, and I don't think we ever necessarily said for certain, but like Midgard is Earth. The interviewer says, all of Earth? It says, it's all of Earth or whatever, but like the people who were involved in Norse mythology, who worship these gods or whatever, are in this section of Earth, and to them, Midgard is to them what's to the Greeks or whatever Gaia, the Earth, was to them. It's just Earth to me. I didn't think of them when I was writing anything as completely separate places. And Kratos got on a boat and went north and found himself in this land that people call Midgard. So we can confirm that you can get to a pantheon by boat, by land, etc., and it's not difficult to do so, save for the physical labor and time of the journey. We can also confirm that Midgard and Greece are the same Earth, and they're not thought of by the writers as completely separate places or anything. So this information is just here to provide that all the pantheons are in fact separated by geographical barriers of the planet, by things like countries or other land masses. I provided examples of gods being able to walk the Earth between the pantheons, Kratos doing it, regular humans doing it, boats being used to travel from the Greek, the Egyptian to Norse. I didn't include every statement for the pantheons being separated by geography, because at this point, I think you've already seen like the half dozen or so author statements that directly confirm that to be the case. There's no evidence that they exist on like the same planet separated by spatial and or temporal barriers. And as I showed, there is in fact direct counter evidence to that position that refutes the claim of that position. Now we're moving on to section 4. This is going to be a little different. Section 4 covers the myths and interpretations that exist within the pantheon, and just explaining that they're just not like one-to-one with the original source material all the time, and elements of specific details can be and have been changed to fit a specific narrative. So there was actually I believe there was an interview that I had brought up initially, that I'll bring up now, that when I had mentioned that Corey had talked about the pantheons being specific interpretations through the world of the people in the pantheon, I thought it'd be a good idea to bring up how those myths and interpretations exist in the pantheon don't have to be 100% accurate if the developers don't wish this to be. A good example of this would be the decision to change Agrabah's race from Caucasian to black. I bring this up to point out the fact that the developers don't actually have to make things 100% accurate to mythos if they don't specifically want to. Matt Sophos had stated as much when he said this in this Bounding into Comics thing that will be linked in the description. That's some article of an interview. And he says, God of War is our interpretation or mythos, not history, Greek or Norse. We tell a personal story with a backdrop of gods, giants, etc. through our lens, and that lens is not 100% by the eddies. For instance, here's a quick review of some mythological main characters that are from God of War 2018. He then provides a list of examples for everyone, so I decided to share these with anyone that's watching this video. Number 1, Brock is a legendary dwarven blacksmith that we made blue and talks like a foul Texas prospector. Number 2, Sindri, another legendary dwarven blacksmith who we made grayish, germophobic, and knows about bacteria. Number 3, Balder, the god of light and purity myths, was twisted, had the basis of his invulnerability twisted to almost all things and made him unable to feel anything as a result of it. Loki was made into a half-giant, quarter-human, quarter-Greek demigod. Did I say more? These are all quoted directly from Sophos and examples that can be used in God of War. Bruno also happens to have a similar take to this position as well. Someone had asked Bruno specifically about Mimir, and in regards to him having horns. He states, well, he is a satyr after all. He's known as Puck from English folklore. Several of his fans responded to this by pointing out more information about Mimir's origins in Norse mythology, like the fact that Mimir, quote, lived in a well under the world tree where he drinks a horn of its water every day to gain its knowledge. Bruno responded by stating, exactly, this is our take on mythology. We've been doing this since 2005. This is just another confirmation of what I'm talking about when I say they change information about the series for whatever reason they choose at any given one time because it is their interpretation. This information is just provided to show that mythological interpretations within the pantheons are, in fact, not always accurate to the original source material and can be changed at any time for any reason. I specifically pointed out in the previous God of War video in regards to the Greek pantheon that Kratos' involvement in the games, as well as the main characters, drastically changed the depiction of the events of the Greek mythology, and the Norse mythology was more likely different. The bigger point here is that if a myth/interpretation can be changed by a creator to be different from its original content, and we accept that to be true of its characters and even general lore, then we ought to accept that the specifics and details of anything within that source material can be subject to change. This would include the origin stories of various real-world mythologies, as well as knowledge and/or perspective of people living in the mythologies. I think I provided my lengthy explanation of the pantheons as a whole in God of War. I've explained the respective size of the pantheons as well as how they exist with respect to one another. I've explained how to travel between them. I've explained the ideas for the pantheon, where they come from, what the people in the regions believe about the world in general. And then I've also explained how the myths are not always 100% accurate and can be changed, which result in different scopes of world building to a massive degree. So now I'm just going to go over a couple misconceptions, and then we're heading into section 2 to cover the Norse pantheon. Misconceptions mainly cover a bunch of different positions as being asserted here, and they include, but are not limited to, the pantheons exist as their own individually separate universes, only divided by the boundaries of quote-unquote geography. Each pantheon is a literal representation of the myths, interpretations, creation stories brought to life as their own isolated reality or realities. Number 3 is that the entire God of War planet is constantly shaped by the beliefs of the people in the pantheons across said planets. So, the opening cinematic for God of War Ascension is used to argue that the Greeks did indeed create the universe using, mainly the primordials. It uses the information from the visuals of the scaling along with a couple additional author statements from Ariel Lawrence to confirm that primordials created the universe. Additionally, the 2010 Wolfman God of War comics have about 2 statements from the children of Uranus about him creating the universe. There's also an additional statement about the creation of the universe from God of War 1, though I don't have it with me right here, that states basically the same thing, that Uranus created the heavens, the universe. Now I'm going to explain why this is a misconception. So I've already covered ad nauseum why the pantheons are not separate universes, as well as how they are or are not sealed temporally or spatially. The main problem here is that this position is assuming that the Greeks or the God of War people in general have a proper understanding of their own cosmology. They don't. They're specifically not written to have an understanding of it. That is literally the entire reason that the God of War characters make the claim that assumes someone and or something created the universe, because they're all supposed to be mythological representations of people who believe those origin stories to be real as they live in the areas shaped by them. It is not intended to be a scientific or a science fictional representation of the Greek mythology. The characters and the world as a whole are intentionally written with the assumption that their world is the only one. That does not mean it literally is. It just means they assume it to be. We have reason based on an overwhelming mountain of evidence that indicates my position to be the correct one. My position also accepts this information claimed right here can actually coexist with the author statements I presented, because I accept this information comes as a direct result of people's assumptions, so it isn't incorrect under the proper context. Again, if you assume they're talking about it from a mythological perspective, all these statements can exist together, they just simply don't understand what they're talking about, because that's the entire point of the writing message. You just simply need to understand when and where that context is being applied. Additionally, assuming even if there was a conflict of information here, which given the context I just mentioned about the Greeks understanding the world, there wouldn't be, the actual amount of author statements that currently assert that pantheons are separate universes is 0. Only one asserts the characters created the universe, and every other statement from different authors that worked on the game asserts that the pantheons are, quote, not separate universes, or all one consistent universe, and are not separated geographically, or not separated spatially and temporally, and explicitly separated geographically. So none of these statements can be used in the context they're being argued for. Also, Ariel Lawrence also confirmed that the primordials were actually created by the Big Bang, and their fighting made the galaxy, so it's incorrect to say they created the universe, as confirmed they were created by it instead. So then there's a statement that will be provided on screen for Matt Sophos, basically being asked about, I guess, the realms in the Norse pantheon, if they have their own spatially temporally separate areas. Well, he's not being asked, but that is what's used for the position, because they have their own stars. What's confirmed in this answer is that the stars in the sky for the Norse pantheon are not real stars. It's not confirmed that they're their own unique spaces. That was something that's asserted by the fan that's basically asking this question. Also refer to this as loading a question. What Matt thinks he's asking here is if the stars are real stars, which he confirmed that they are. He does not confirm that each place has its own stars. Matt has already confirmed in a previous statement to the same fan that the Pantheons themselves are separated mythically rather than a sci-fi sense. So this cannot be used in the current context as this is being argued. And then there's obviously the Greek origin story, or the Norse origin story from Mimir. This falls under basically the reliability of the Greek origin story the same way. It's just a mythical representation of the Pantheon coming to life, not a scientific representation, aka just what they believe. The second misconception section is talking about how each Pantheon is just a literal representation of the myths, interpretations, or creation stories brought to their own life as their own isolated realities. For these, I'll just be using the GDC YouTube video and then obviously the same Corey statements that I provided initially. So in this statement, in this YouTube video that was provided, that we revisit the same information I presented earlier in the video where I explained that Corey clearly established that the Pantheons are just representations of the beliefs come to life, that quote-unquote geography is what separates the Pantheons, and quote-unquote geography is just that, a separation of different parts of a landmass on a planet from one another by the way that regional differences and borders. It is never clarified, stated, or implied to be anything else ever in the entire series. And that interpretation is directly contradicted and crushed by the developers who worked on this game, including Corey himself. Now, misconception number 3 is going to be a little bit slower, or I guess a little bit simpler. It basically just asserts that the entire God of War planet is constantly being shaped by the beliefs of people in the regions across the planet. So this is just an extra point that's provided by people that just decided to assume the planet is being shaped by the beliefs of the people in the regions of the Pantheon, as if they have some kind of subjective reality where they're like literal thoughts or things, or just creating new versions of other countries or things around the world. Unfortunately, we have no information on the supposed power inverse. As I mentioned, the gods of every pantheon are completely ignorant to the proper scale of their own origin stories, though it's worth noting that characters in verse were never actually making a scientific claim about their world to begin with. Only the scalers are doing that. The author statements mentioned previously don't actually present this as a, quote, power or ability, but rather as a condition of how the Pantheons exist with respect to our worlds, not each other. So yeah, it's not really any sort of power that you can use. Now that we've covered the Pantheons and the misconceptions, we're now going to explore how the Norse Pantheon and the Norse realms exist. I'll just have 3 points in this small misconception section, and then we will finally move on to author statements. So I've got 3 points to cover here. The realms of the Norse Pantheon existing in the same physical space and universe as one another. Number 2 is that the realms of the Norse Pantheon are under the same flow of time, just being separated partially by the Bifrost light of Alpine. And number 3 is just giving clarification on the Yggdrasil's relationship to the Norse realms. So in the first one, I'll point out that in the previous section I provided I provided this statement of Corey explaining how the gods of the God of War world have their own domains. Previously in the conversation, he mentioned how Midgard is Scandinavia on Earth, and that the other realms are parallel dimensions locked by the same physical space. This would mean that the Norse Pantheon has most of its realms existing in the same location, but they're simply inaccessible to the Norse under normal circumstances. He also points out that Midgard, the base of the 9 realms, is just Scandinavia on Earth, which means it shares the same temporal and spatial dimension as the Greek Pantheon. I also mentioned this information when I was talking about the Pantheons existing in one shared universe. If the Pantheons exist in the same universe, the realms shouldn't be different, considering you can just walk or take a boat out from them. You can walk or take a boat into Midgard from outside the Pantheon. So, the second interview that I provided is the one that I had mentioned previously from Game Informer when Matt Sophos is answering questions. There's actually a later portion of that in the same timestamp I provided, but it's now 37:35 to 38:40 if you'd like to check the link. This interviewer has Matt Sophos confirm that all the realms exist in the same physical space, referencing Freya's statements and explanation from God of War 4. The interviewer asks Matt Sophos a follow-up question about the realms in the Norse Pantheon. Quote, it's not like in Alpine, if you keep walking, you can eventually get to the Egyptian version of Alpine, which would be really trippy and cool. Matt responds with, I guess you theoretically could, because all of our realms, we establish that they exist. Freya says they exist in the same physical space. They're essentially kind of like, dimensions on top of each other. That's why the realm, tower, or temple, and the bridge can exist in all the realms. All those towers, all those things exist in the same realm, so if you're inside the light Temple, and Alfheim, you could theoretically travel from there to Muspelheim or any of those places, you'd be in that location. This technically confirms the realms exist the same physical space, or the same spatial dimensions. They're just slightly separated by something in reality, or at least they seem to be implied. And you could apparently just walk between the realms. It's just that you would end up in the same respective realm tower, Tyr's Temple. And then the third one will be Freya's statement from the Bifrost travel room, where she's explaining to Kratos how this works for the first time. She says that she basically explains that the 9 realms, the realm towers, and the Bifrost travel room are all, quote, intertwined and coexisting on the branches of the world tree, separated only by the Bifrost light of. Now, explanation would mean that the light of Alfheim is mainly what separates any normal connection between the realms. Light of Alfheim has statements in the game that it, quote, makes you one with it, or, quote, drives you insane when you make contact with it. There's even examples of it burning you due to Atreus' interaction with it, so we can safely say that this would impair citizens and individuals in the Norse Pantheon from physically walking and or traveling between the realms under normal conditions. Hence why we would use the Bifrost light. Hence why they would use the Bifrost at all. I would like to point out now that this subject is talked about a little bit more in Ragnarok, so I'll go over it in more details there. Overall, we can still confirm that you can move between the realms. It's just dangerous to do so, and it's very impractical compared to like Tyr's Temple. We could all confirm the realms exist in the same physical space, just that they're separated by the aforementioned light of Alfheim. Lastly, we can confirm that the realms in the Norse Pantheon also exist in the same universe as the Greek one, and that the Midgar is just where Scandinavia is located on the God of War. Time to move on to point 2. Point 2 is the realms in the Norse Pantheon are actually under one flow of time, which is being dilated by the Bifrost light of Alfheim. So referencing Freya's statement and her explanation again, I'm just going to explain how the realms exist in relation to one another. In the video I provided, that'll be up there shortly, the YouTube one, which features Kratos entering the light of Alfheim, Atreus confirms that he was, quote, gone a long, long time, whereas Kratos was just convinced he was only gone a moment when he stepped into the light. This would indicate that the light of Alfheim has a different area of time being experienced compared to the rest of the realms. This is actually corroborated by Mimir himself in the scans covering Kratos' time in Helheim. He confirms that, quote, the Lake of Souls feels faster than Alfheim time. It's important to note that Freya, as we've mentioned before, has already stated that the 9 realms are intertwined and connected on the Yggdrasil, quote, separated only by the Bifrost light of Alfheim. If this is true, we currently have no reason to assume otherwise, this would mean that the light of Alfheim is essentially dilating the flow of time between the realms. If any of the realms exist in the same physical space and are connected intertwined, this would mean they naturally ought to share the same flow of time. This is not always the case in fiction, but it's usually assumed to be the standard. However, in this case, we can see the difference of time is being caused by the light of Alfheim, as the light of Alfheim is essentially what fills the location between the realms. This would mean the flow of time is being split across the realms, as it would be taking different lengths of time to get to each space as something is directly interfering with it. This would effectively turn every realm into a different time zone that still operates under the same flow of time, but how it's actually being experienced by people inside is completely different. Hence why I refer to it and liken it to time dilation. Keep in mind, there's more information to cover about this regarding like Ragnarok, but we'll get back to that in section 2. We're going to head on to the final point, and then we'll cover misconceptions. So this is just clarification of the Yggdrasil's relationship to the Norse realms. Freya provides her explanation, pretty simple. She basically says, the Yggdrasil is bound to the fate of the world. The tree nourishes our souls. The dew from its tree nourishes our soil. The dew from its leaves feed our valleys and rivers. The tree's very existence supports all of creation across its burrows. Its life energy interwoven into the tapestry of life. Birth, growth, death, and rebirth. Every strand transcending time, transcending space. Everything comes back to the tree. So there's a lot to come back to. What to unpack here. First of all, the tree obviously exists in tandem with the 9 realms, as it's bound to the fate of the world. Secondly, the tree supports the manipulation and creation of life in the Norse Pantheon, as it, quote, feeds the valleys, rivers, soils, etc., along with supporting all of creation in its burrows. It's also stated to have the life energy interwoven into the tapestry of life, birth, growth, death, and rebirth. This would technically mean the function of the tree can also support the existence of an afterlife as well as death, as those that do both live and die eventually travel to various places within the 9 realms, such as Helheim, Alfheim, etc. Lastly, it's stated that every strand transcends time, transcends space. Everything comes back to the tree. This would indicate that regardless of the length of time or distance to the tree, everything that is born on it will eventually return to the tree when it dies, so that in some form or fashion, it will one day be made again through its rebirth process. There are some additional statements from the God of War 4 art book and the God of War 4 guidebook, which provide a little bit more lore about the Yggdrasil. The art book basically says that the Yggdrasil was supposed to have an ethereal connection to the realms, along with the Lake of Nine. It's confirmed that they both go, quote, hand in hand in the Norse Pantheon, or Norse mythology, since both were thought to be ever present in everything in existence. The devs thing thought it would be a good idea to bring these, quote, non-physical objects into existing physical form. That would mean the Yggdrasil holds a special connection to the realms while also maintaining a direct, physically connected state. The God of War 4 guidebook basically confirms or reconfirms the Freya statement, except through Atreus' words, by saying that all the worlds sit on the branches and roots of the Yggdrasil. This would mean it's actually physically large enough to hold its entire structure. To reiterate, the Yggdrasil is connected directly to the fate of the Nine Realms of the Norse Pantheon, holds the Nine Realms physically on its branches, is responsible for sustaining life, growth, death, and rebirth throughout the Norse Pantheon, and then all things that come from the Yggdrasil return to the Yggdrasil when they die, regardless of the length of time or distance spaced out between them in said tree. It is an ethereal connection to the realms and is essentially Mother Nature for the Norse. There's some additional information regarding the Yggdrasil that is covered in Ragnarok, and once again, I will remind you to wait patiently for me to mention such details until we get to that video. Will come out after this one. In the meantime, we'll cover one final section of misconceptions before finally going to the author statements. Last couple misconceptions are just this. First one, the realms of the Norse Pantheon are all essentially their own space-time continuums, making the Norse Pantheon a multiverse. Second one is that the realms each have their own separate flow of time from each other, solidifying the evidence for them being space-time continuums. And number three is that the Yggdrasil has a higher dimensional relationship to the rest of the Norse Pantheons. So, essentially, the first one regarding the realms of the Norse Pantheons all essentially existing as their own space-time continuums is kind of bled into the second one because they both kind of assert the same thing. And this is technically debunked by everything I mentioned in the first section because they're all located in the same universe of space and time, separated by geography. So, again, a lot of that just all falls under the conditions of people just assuming creation stories to be real, to be taken literally and scientifically when they're explicitly, intentionally intended not to be. And they're all made under the assumption that people just talk about the world in an accurate setting. They're not. Additionally, just going on further, that I mentioned this several times before, so you kind of know the deal. The claim that asserts the realms have different space and time because they exist as mere reflections of each other or novel basically is used as supporting evidence here, where Freya says these realms are on different planes of existence. So first of all, this scan confirms that they both still occupy the same physical space, so they should definitely not be in separate universes. You can be on separate planes of existence and still exist within the same universe and the same flow of time. This is also refuted by Matt Sofa's statements in the interview that I provided, where he confirms that you can just walk from Midgard to Alfheim because they exist in the same place. As for the example, the Twitter example that's provided with Matt Sofa's answering a fan about one of the murals on the Triclip path and panel, which is used to show that all the Nine Realms have their own spaces. I explained this one before, but just to reiterate again, all Matt Sophos confirms is the stars in the sky for the realm are real. He doesn't confirm that they have their own space, especially in response to the guy that wrote the question. And then the third one, specifically in regards to the Yggdrasil having a higher dimensional relationship, this is going to take a while, so buckle in. This is a big one. So this position basically asserts that the Yggdrasil exists as a higher dimensional object in response to the Norse Pantheon. It uses a couple different statements from Thor's novel, the guidebook, the game, etc. in order to assert this. It first claims that the Yggdrasil is large enough to hold all the realms on its branches. Then it asserts it's basically a non-physical entity that is everywhere since it is, quote, ever present in the mythology. Next, it asserts that the Yggdrasil exists in multiple planes of existence at once, specifically dimensions of different space and time by using Freya's statements in the game and in the novel. Finally, it pulls statements from the novel to explain how the Yggdrasil's branches are infinite in size. By combining all this evidence together, you can supposedly get a higher dimensional burden of proof, since you'd be providing proof that the Yggdrasil is temporally, spatially separated from the realms while simultaneously existing in them, Is large enough to hold all of them on its own structure, is infinitely larger than the realms, has a true non-physical form compared to the physical one you'd argue exists in the 9 realms, and also supports all life that exists within said lower dimensional realm. The trouble with this position is that it ultimately makes far too many assumptions. So first of all, let's be clear about something before we get started. Nowhere in the entire Greek source material has anything ever even akin to a remote, like even remotely akin to a higher dimensional construct ever existed, ever proven to exist, or has ever been shown to exist. Ascended Athena was the closest phenomenon that anyone is ever going to get to assuming there was a higher dimension beyond the Greek pantheon, but there was never any evidence in God of War 3 or any source material that mentioned and or included Ascended Athena that provided the proper evidence needed to prove a form of higher dimensionality in reference to her or the place that she resided. There is no reason to assume that the place Athena went to was any more specific than and any more useful than like a spiritual afterlife for selfless gods. The Yggdrasil is not so different in this regard. You see, every single statement that was provided here doesn't actually talk about the issue in question. It just provides statements that at a glance seem good enough to put on paper for a higher dimensional rating. For starters, the first thing you need to establish is that an object in question is separated both temporally, spatially from the alleged lower dimensional space, since higher dimensional objects typically do not normally occupy lower dimensional spaces unless specific conditions are met for them to do so. The Yggdrasil does not fulfill this condition correctly, as its roots and branches can naturally exist in the main 9 realms of the Norse Pantheon with no interference and no portals, special conditions being fulfilled for it to do so. Secondly, you need to demonstrate a relationship of superiority between the object in question, aka the Yggdrasil, and the alleged lower dimensional space in order to prove that the higher dimensional objects are inherently superior to the lower ones in that case. Unfortunately, the Yggdrasil does not demonstrate this either, as the characters in the Norse Pantheon can directly influence/interact with the tree and are claimed to have damaged it, according to the prophecy of the giants, as they claim that Thor in the World Serpent will shake it so hard it splinters. Third, you'll need to demonstrate that there's a quantitative and qualitative difference between the two spaces in question, the Yggdrasil and the North realms. The information used to argue this is the statement from the God of War 4 novel about the branches of the Yggdrasil stretching out to infinity. If you could prove they're indeed infinite in size, as well as infinite in comparison to the size of the realms, you could make an argument that the Yggdrasil might be quantitatively and qualitatively superior to the North realms by an infinite degree. Unfortunately, there are some problems with this claim and scan, not unlike the claims made before. Zim, as well as myself, have both talked about this discussion at length in a separate God of War novel video, which will be linked in the description if you're curious. We've pretty much talked this to death already. The statement is using the phrase, like a tree branch stretching out to infinity, as a simile to the strange environment mentioned in the previous part of the sentence. This would be the realm between realms, in this case. It's not using infinity as an adjective either. It's just being utilized as a noun in the sentence to indicate a designation for the branch to go to rather than a quantity being applied to the branch itself. This is also not applied from Kratos' perspective. It's applied from the narrator referring to the observable standpoint from the doorway into the realm between realms sits from where Kratos is sitting. And it's not actually in the realm between realms. So you can't really assert that the branches are infinite, let alone infinite in comparison to the rest of the realms, because that's not what the sentence is trying to say. But the fourth, the higher dimensional object, usually, needs to have a lower dimensional object embedded in it. The scan presented for this is supposed to show that all the realms exist in the branches of the Yggdrasil, referring to Atreus' statement, obviously. This would mean that they actually aren't embedded, but rather simply attached like an accessory. I'm going to kind of invoke Ragnarok here for just a little bit, because I kind of need to slam this point home a little bit harder than usual. During the events of the game, Ratatoskr tells Kratos to gather the steeds of the 4 seasons so they can tend to the Yggdrasil, fearing that if they leave it alone for too long without management, the overgrowth of the Yggdrasil will cause its branches to grow too large and shake the realms right off the sides. This would clearly indicate that the realms are not at all embedded in the structure, as they can just go flying off the side when you increase the size of the structure. It would be like saying that a tissue is basically embedded in my arm because it happens to be on my arm. It's not literally in my arm. It's just resting on top. Lastly, the non-physical aspect of the tree is technically already debunked by the previous section when I pointed out the Yggdrasil was made into an existing physical object by the God of War dev team. Its involvement in the Norse realms in an ever-present position doesn't really matter when you still can't provide evidence that the realms of the Norse pantheon are inherently inferior to the Yggdrasil, along with evidence that they have their own distinct space-time continuums, something I almost also refuted in the previous parts. I would say that this is probably one of the most main, like, the main misconceived claims that are made about the Norse realms, although there's probably more out there. This is probably, I'll say probably, sufficient enough evidence to refute these misconceptions and address the misconceptions regarding the Norse pantheon. Now, it's time to get back into the last big section, which is the author statements discussion. This one's going to be more off the cuff, and Zim will be joining us for this part because we have a lot to say about this portion. Obviously, though, before we begin, before we explain this, one of our colleagues, Balrog Blaze, had a desire to have a very, very specific line of dialogue be implemented into this video before we covered the author statements in mass. I believe his reasoning for this inclusion for this singular scan was just to summarize the following conclusions / ramifications of disclosing details of these author statements. For those of you who are unaware of his decorum, he sometimes occasionally feels the need to be a bit blunt, but you'll see what I'm talking about when it shows up on screen momentarily. So, just to reiterate, he wanted me to say, quote, "The dildo of consequences rarely arrives lube." That is to say, what I'm going to be providing here in this section is ultimately one of the worst possible outcomes that could happen to a verse that you scale if information is not properly used. You basically have to consider that this video is made as a direct result as complete, total, and utter failure of the God of War power scaling community on the internet. The inability of this community to source information, cherry-pick scans and sources, forge statements, consistent lying, and the lack of understanding of the English language, in some cases, or got to this point. I'm merely here to provide you what you need so you can understand, for lack of a better term, how fucked you really are if you're trying to scale God of War the way it is presented online after seeing what Section 3 has to provide, as well as like Section 1 and 2 in the previous videos we've already done. This mainly in reference to what's being done on Versus Wikis, Discord, YouTube, and various arguments and positions, as well as those similar and or adjacent to them listed in this video. With that disclaimer out of the way, it's time for us to begin with Section 3, the author stuff. Okay. This will have a couple different sections, but I'm first going to cover some author credibility. Before I begin, since Zim finally has a speaking portion, is there anything you'd like to say before we continue?
No, I'll just first we'll cover the credibility, and then when we start having a little more open discussion, I'll jump in. But first, let's handle the credibility.
Yeah. So I believe. Hold on, let me get the rest of these out of the way because I didn't end up using as many of those tabs as I thought I did. The main assumption of credibility comes from this idea that, like, I'm sure you've seen it before. We actually kind of talked about that initially with the, like, I think we mentioned this briefly in the Kratos versus Ozra G1 blog, where it was kind of asserted, and this has been asserted previously, that the Word of God and the author statements are actually very inconsistent. They're super inconsistent, right? And they don't actually consistently confirm other information, and they're not reliable with one another or something to that effect. Like, they contradict each other all the time. I've actually heard this position a lot. Well, in Corey's initial universe statement Twitter thing that I mentioned, his Kotaku answer, and I believe his GDC statements, and then his E3 statements, I have about 4 consistent statements from Corey that confirm that the actual universe is yet to be explored, that all of it is a single consistent universe, and that all the gods in the Pantheon have the same domains the way the countries have their own domains, that the world is the universe in a planetary sense, and that all of them are wrapped around the planet. Then I have statements from Matt Sophos, specifically, that confirm that, again, all the pantheons are separated by geography. This is a combination of geography and local belief system. He confirms that the pantheons are separated mythically rather than in a sci-fi sense, so there's no, like, space-time barriers or anything at all. They're not treated as separate universes. And then in the Game Informer interview that I've already provided multiple times, he just confirms that Greece and Midgar are not different places that Kratos just walked to, or more specifically got on a boat to. Then for Bruno's, I've got about plenty of statements for Bruno. So Bruno has confirmed, as I mentioned before, that there aren't multiple universes in God of War, only regional divides. He confirmed that when he said God of War Universe in reference to our previous statements, he meant one singular universe where all the Pantheons coexist separated by geographical regions. Then after this, I believe I have another 12 to 13 direct statements. So he confirms that in response to some question that someone asked him, wherein they, I believe the tweet had actually been answered, deleted for this. Hang on one sec, I just have to get rid of a couple of these tabs. Okay, perfect. Basically confirms that this is in regards to someone also asking him a question that yo Bruno, you know how the universes are infinite, and since a realm is basically a universe at a different time of text, would that mean every God of War realm is infinite? Simplified are the 9 realms infinitely expanding, and he basically says the 9 realms exist in the same space as indicated by Tyr's temple and the travel room. You just need a means to step between them. Midgar is another word for the earth. This is why Kratos walked from Greece to the North Lands. Midgar is not infinitely expanding. And then some tweet that was asked after that was provided after that, is and has been deleted by the tweet author. You're going to see a lot of that in the section to come. And Bruno responded to whatever that deleted tweet was by saying that realms in this case are different versions of the same place that exist in the same universe. What you see in the game are tears that open up to different to other realms, a shortcut to access them. Then I have another statement from Bruno where he's confirmed. He's asked by someone if the creation myths of the universe and the God of War, the universe and God of War are valid, because both the Greeks and Norse have their own version of how universes came to be, and this got me a little confused. So I'd be grateful if you could help me. Bruno responds by saying that in today's world, we have different religions with all different creation stories that are equally believed by many. They all coexist. I always imagine the God of War universe working much like this. So basically, the same. I think they asked later down in the section, like how it's possible that many of these contradictions can be like there's contradictions in these, and how can they be explained? And Bruno basically says, how can contradictions in creation stories be explained today? What he is essentially saying is when every single belief system in the world has essentially asserted a claim that our God or our thing that we believe in made the universe or made all of existence or this thing, and we're all claiming the same thing. What he's essentially saying is that the Pantheons are the same example. They're just a bunch of people believing in a particular thing, believing it a certain way, and well, they're holding steadfast to that belief without any actual evidence of belief. Continuing on, I believe we have another statement, a third statement from Bruno after the initial 2 ones. So that's statement number 5, where he was asked if mythologies in God of War are different countries or in different mythological universes. He says same planet, different geographical regions, parentheses, countries. He was asked by another fan if, well, actually, no, the same person, if what will be the next mythological universe in God of War. And he's just, to respond to that. So he says, I think it'd be interesting to explore new stories, considering that each mythology is a universe in God of War. And then Bruno says, all mythologies exist on the same planet and the same universe in God of War. I believe in a different conversation later down the line, he specifically talks about that someone asked him if the Earth is flat, because all the mythologies exist on the same planet. Are they on this flat Earth featured in the Greek games? I find this strange because not even a flat Earth concept has multiple suns/stars. And Bruno mentions that I've mentioned this several times, but today there are multiple creation stories that coexist in our world. How can that be? Yet multiple people across one world believe in them at the same time. Also, at one point in time, people believed that the Earth was flat. Things changed. So if it wasn't evident enough that they're wrong, it should be by now, I'd imagine. Oh, and then he's also asked another question by John Emerson, some fan that asked him a lot of questions. Do you think each myth has its own reality/universe since multiple cosmologies can coexist? And he says, in God of War, Greek and Norse myths exist in the same universe. It's like traveling to another country and seeing another culture. I believe that there's about 4 more direct statements from him, if I'm not mistaken.
If there's only like a few more statements, we could just add that into the video after the fact. Like, while this is going on, we could just say
Yeah,
further statements.
someone basically asked them in regards to like the if the Pantheon had a separate sun in the same universe, and Bruno just confirms. Bruno basically just confirms in response to someone asking if he's Kratos is sailing out of Egypt. He says he sailed away from Greece. That's clear, at least. Same question: why did Tyr need a travel stone, or did Kratos need one? Because it's clear that he said the land of pharaohs. Also, someone from the land of pharaohs also came to Delphi. In Ascension, how did he reach? This is in reference to the statement that I provided in section 1, referring to the random guy that wasn't mentioned. And Bruno mentions, I don't think the travel stone is like a passport, meaning that you need one to travel from another location. It probably just allows you to cut the distance. Kratos had to physically travel to go from Greece to Scandinavia. Yeah. There are, I want to say, probably about 4 more direct statements, at least, give or take. Hang on, let me see if I can grab the rest of them. Sorry for anyone who's watching the video. I'm just a little bit winded after having to read all of that. But it will be done shortly. There we go. All right. We got about 4 more now. Seems Zim has been lost to us for the moment, so I'll have to represent. So basically what I've been doing this entire video. Basically, you can check this on Bruno's Twitter if you find the link for it. You probably will have to find like it in reference to, I want to say, other people talking to him, because on Twitter you can't really go past Bruno's statements past, I want to say, September of 2021, or no, 2022, because there's just actually no, 2021, because there are so many statements, because he tweets so much. Like, I don't think you can bring up the rest of the Twitter statements that he has. But if you find people that have like retweeted his, you could probably check like a thread or something. He basically did a thread on the Fallen Gods comic after it came out initially, and he was just happy to answer some questions. And someone asked that I noticed whenever the blades return, they are burning. This is in regards to the Blades of Chaos, obviously. Do you know if this was an art-based decision or perhaps something else? Also, Kratos took a boat from Greece to Egypt. I'm assuming they're located on the same planet. If so, would this mean the Norse realm is too? Bruno says, Greece, and Egypt are on the same planet, and so is Scandinavia. I think the blades are on fire to show that he can never outrun them. Remember, in God of War 2018, the blades were the only fire that can burn in Helheim. Then going on, there is a statement in Spanish that basically in regards to someone asking a question about the territories. And they're asking, they'd like to know if each mythological zone has a border, which is referring to the Pantheons. And Bruno basically just confirms that no, they're only geographical territories. So they don't have any sort of like border other than like, they don't have any like barrier or anything. You can just travel there directly. one of our colleagues, one mentioned previously, as in Balrog Blaze, basically had asked, because he was really curious after we went through most of the research for the first God of War video, to ask Bruno for clarification if the God of War planet was actually bigger. So he asked him, hey Bruno, if you could answer this would absolutely help me understand the God of War geography. So is the planet God of War takes place on our planet size, or is it bigger? And he basically says, yeah, as far as I know, the God of War planet, the God of War takes place on our Earth. So, you know, it's the same size as our Earth. Then, what else do we have here? I believe that is all of Bruno's statements. Wait. So I think I might have more. Okay, no, that was the last one. Then I also have a statement for Aria Lawrence, which has a deleted response, or some response that is unavailable, where she basically says, I always believed Zeus and the rest of the Olympians were limited to this planet. I don't know what she was responding to, but considering this is not the first and not going to be the last of the multiple author statements where they confirmed that the Pantheons are actually like country-sized, and has a deleted response next to it, I think I can probably assume that that person did not want to see their answer publicly reviewed. So, if I go through these, if we're counting all of Cory Barlog's statements, he has 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't include this here, but there are also the statements from the YouTube one that I mentioned, Gamescom. So there's like 5, maybe 6 from Cory. There's 3 from Matt Sopos, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 from Bruno, and then 1 from Aria Lawrence. Which actually technically means that Bruno has like more statements on the thing than like Cory, Matt, and Ariel Lawrence combined. But it essentially comes out to around 24 statements. So that's a lot of consistency. You want to know how many statements I was able to find by going through Bruno's Twitter that confirmed the Pantheons are actually separate universes in the scientific, like, sci-fi sense? 0. I was able to find 0. I wasn't able to find a single one. And obviously, confirmation that the Pantheons and their creation stories exist just as that. They're just myths. So I don't see this contradiction anywhere. There is no contradiction between the authors. They've always consistently represented the same thing. And many of these statements exist from as far back as, I want to say, like 2017, 2016 for some of them, depending on which ones you're looking at. A lot of them are 2021. A lot of them go into 2023. Like, there is so many of them that consistently say the same thing in a slightly different way, to the point where you kind of have to just ignore a disgusting amount of preponderance of evidence. I'm going to check in with Zim right now before we continue, because he seems to be unable to talk. Zim, are you able to speak with us again? Or are you lost to the void? Let's see. All right, well, it seems I'm on my own, folks. Too much stuff is going on Zim's mic, so he can't contribute. He'll just have to message and provide a silent commentary. Unfortunate. Apparently he's saying he did warn me, but whatever. Whatever, I'm not bothered by it. So the second section just basically is covering, like, creator statements, essentially. Well, I'm obviously more creator statements, but it's covering, I want to say, necessity of Word of God. Now, to explain why Word of God is absolutely necessary, I kind of just have to reference the creation myth thing that I talked about like 50 times. Obviously, in section 1, you can't really, due to the information that I provided, you can't really explain without author statements how the Pantheons exist as like the mythological basis of like their own region. That is to say, you can assume there are obviously different cultures in the different pantheons. This is true, but you cannot technically like equate them completely like one to one to one to one with like a specific example because the games don't explain this. All the games explain is that Kratos or the various characters travel from one pantheon to another, and there happens to be like another group of gods there. You don't actually have an official explanation for why this is. That's only provided outside of the source material, not included in the games, not included in the novels, not included in the guidebooks, not included in the art books, not included in any of the officially licensed source material for Santa Monica Studios or God of War. None of that is included or covered. All of it comes specifically from interviews or sections that come outside of the game. So this is not only something that you absolutely need to be included, you're kind of required to. As an example, like I think Matt Sofa's statements are probably like some of the more silly examples here when he mentions like obviously them being separated by like geography and the world existing that way. Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of these statements are literally just people asking, how is it possible that the world can be destroyed? It's clearly not the case that even though we have people who played the games multiple times and went through them mass and still don't understand how the cosmology works, it's clearly not the case that the Norse, or not the Norse, the God of War cosmology in general does a good job of explaining this information. It just kind of shows you how he was able to travel there. It doesn't actually provide an official inverse explanation of how the Pantheons work. That's not provided at all. This is not a clarification position, because that's also been argued in regards to this point that I'm providing, that all these other statements merely provide clarification. This is not clarification. This is just substance. This is just pure raw substance. This is the entire subject. We're not pointing in the direction, we're making it. As an example, I can provide like, I say two more instances of this in particular from Bruno in regards to a couple different author statements, or in regards to a couple different fan questions. Someone basically asked Bruno in Spanish. If you see these questions, they'll probably be translated on the screen, but you'll have to go and translate them yourself. But Google Translate will be there for you. So they basically said, well, today in your, they said, hello, Bruno. Good morning. I've always had this doubt. How is it that you see the end of God of War 1? It is simply omitted by the events of the other game. Is it simply omitted by the events of the other games, or is it an alternate dimension? Something where Kratos is a good God of War, overcoming the death of his family, and therefore noting from the other games happening, making a new timeline where the new protagonist is Deimos. Is it also possible there's another timeline where the Sisters of Fate or something like that? And Bruno basically responds by saying, basically, when Jefe made the game, he didn't know if there was going to be a sequel. The ending where Kratos is the God of War throughout time is the ending where there is only one game. The important thing is that Kratos became a part of Olympus and received the swords of Athena. There's another Twitter statement that kind of covers this because someone asks, I guess, a set of questions provided by one of their friends. And the questions, if I'm not mistaken, is, let me see if I can read them. Hello, I'd like to ask that the amount of retcons in the God of War series has never been problematic for Santa Monica Studios. For example, the narrator at the end of the God of War 1 says that Kratos, after ascending to the throne, watched humanity and their wars forever, but at the beginning of the next game, he was stripped of his God of War title. Number 2, the design of the gods in the first game were also very different from the God of War 3 version. Number 3, the underworld is very different in the first and third installments. And number 4, in one of the treasure tablets in the first God of War, there was a video of a modern humanity finding Cronus' bones in the Desert of Lost Souls, but in God of War 3, Kratos dies in the Abyss of Tartarus. This is all the stuff from the games, and it's hard to see this is non-canonical because of that. And Bruno basically says, number 1, referring to the God of War 1 ending, that is the original ending because there was no way of knowing if the game would be a hit and the sequel would be made. This way it had a satisfying conclusion. Number 2, referring to the faces that you see in God of War 1 when you pick up the towers on like the little gates, like the towers of the gods. The statues and portals that depict the gods in God of War 1 were representations of them. God of War 3 showed their faces. Number 3 confirms that the different areas of Hades between the games look different because they're geographically located in separate spaces. One is below Mount Olympus, and the other one is in another location near Athens. Number 4 is that the ones involving Kronos being a corpse in the desert is basically a Easter egg with potential sequel ideas, not canon. Kratos having a brother and Zeus being his father were ones that were used. Now, obviously, you can assume that Kronos is like, like not being dead wouldn't happen in the main timeline, but you can't necessarily prove that that's an alternate timeline continuity, or not empirically. You just kind of have to assume it is. This is a statement where you wouldn't actually know this, especially if you read God of War 1's novel, because God of War 1's novel has the scene with Kratos seeing all of time and all of war from the perspective of the throne. Now, at the end of the game, you might not assume going into the game that would be there, because obviously he goes into the next game and he gets off the throne and goes to Sparta, or in 2, depending on which one you're playing. But the novel confirms the scene happens by showing it in more detail. So a lot of people were under the impression that that scene actually did happen. That's just a power ability that the gods of war have, that's something that he does. What Bruno confirms is that that's just there as an ending for a satisfying conclusion if God of War 1 was the only continuity in the series, just as one game and never took off. It was like either a failure or they just didn't want to make a sequel. There is no way you could know that definitively unless you, or even like practically, unless you actually had an author or some dev confirm it. You would need that to happen. There's no way you could actually conclusively prove that. You would just be at a loss. So I think after that, we have a third section. We're about halfway done with the author sections here. And this is just discussing the over-reliance Word of God statements in service to God of War power scale. Well, I would say that a lot of positions in God of War, specifically in regards to cosmology, are completely and totally reliant on Word of God. Yes, I did just get finished explaining that we need Word of God to explain how the cosmology works. Yes, because it's not explained in the games. By definition, we are also over-reliant on Word of God because you have to use it to explain entire cruxes of an entire position. It's not like I'm using a crutch to walk around. It's as if I don't even have like any legs at all. Like it's not an assisting or supporting piece of evidence. It is the entire substance of the position, essentially. I would say is the examples that I could probably provide the easiest ones that I could provide would be examples that are presented in the first couple sections of the videos. Regarding the cosmology as a whole, like you just can't make those Pantheon statements without these. You have 2 more statements that you can provide in regards to ascension, or questions about ascension, wherein, for example, people would argue Kratos had reactive evolution as a result of how he interacted with the Pollux and Castor, based on a conversation between one of the fans and I think Tony Young, one of the developers that had worked on God of War Ascension. Now, what he says is not necessarily that important, with the exception of probably like the second statement. I will just say that all the information he asks about if the time stop works on characters, Kratos' speed being a condition of whether or not he'd be able to move under that time stop, the author's answer to that, which all of this will be on the screen so you can directly read this. This entire conversation includes details that are not in the game. That is not in the source material, that is not in this. You cannot get this from like a proper statement. Like you need this in order to have this position of him having resistance, how the ability would work, his reaction to it, etc. Regardless of your position, regardless of how you feel about the position, to make that position with proper amounts of evidence, you would need this. It doesn't matter what the position is, whether you think it's right, wrong, like, it doesn't matter. You need this to make that position. This is not simply like clarification. This is not simply an expansion of thought. This is the entire brain cell, essentially. There's the same thing for the second set of statements here, with Mark Simon and Tony confirming whether or not like Kratos was affected by the effects of the Amulet of Ouroboros from Ascension. Both of these are going to be provided on screen back to back because they essentially talk about the same thing, just between 2 separate pieces of conversation. Okay. Then section 4, faked scans and forgeries. So we've talked about this ad nauseum initially, and that is that Kratos, or actually not Kratos, God of War in general, as of verse, has a lot of faked and forged scans that float out there on the internet, where people are manufacturing and creating false material in order to push things for a specific power scaling narrative. So I've already found plenty of the ones that are there, several of which were made during the scripting of the video, a couple, most of which were found prior. I think I covered a few of these in the original, like, why Dante versus Kratos doesn't work video, which will, again, be linked in the description below. Technically more of a God of War reference video now than anything. But yeah, I covered a lot of these. Some of them that I'm going to bring up in particular is the Santa Monica Studio script thing that mentions that there's a direction script of the God of War game, and it guesses to which one it is. And it basically says the Nexus is activated, the Death Gate opens, which opens as a portal to a plane created by the Death God. Kratos enters it and finds himself in a primordial realm outside of all the infinities of space, time, existence, and non-existence, serving as a purgatory to an orgy of mirrored worlds. Narration number 12, Kratos stood in front of a strange, transcendent land beyond the realms of physics and dimensionality. The primal duality of life and death was absent, as if death came from the air. It was truly the domain of death. So, I believe there is a statement from Bruno on this being, like, fake. But even without that, I can already confirm on, like, well, for the same reason I'm going to confirm this for the previous statements, or I guess the following statements, I can already confirm that this is fake based on the way that it's described. This is completely inconsistent with how text and dialogue is used in God of War. They never use, like, the duality of objects, transcendent lands beyond, like, physics and dimensionality. I don't even think they really mention physics, albeit, like, maybe briefly. Dimensionality, I don't think is ever even, like, that word is never even used in the entirety of the material. Along with these, putting in combination with one another, that's aside from the fact. That's aside from the fact that this scan doesn't exist. You can't find it on Santa Monica Studios' website. You can't reverse search it. You can't find it in the URL. It can't be sourced. So not only would it not be usable, it wouldn't even be consistent even if it was. So just going to point out that is basically, there's no point in even providing it. The Dawn of Creation scan is another one that I think we provided in previous past. Like, this one basically just says essentially the same fucking thing. Yeah, it basically essentially recalls the stuff from God of War Ascension, but it states a lot of, like, it basically states a lot of, like, loaded language. It says there's only chaos, a void of pure absolute nothingness, the embodiment of non-existence. It ended up creating its children in order to cope with its eternal loneliness. The conceptual forces of nature called the primordials to prove their supremacy and dominance. A war was waged between them. Their battle forged all of creation for the first time, and its endless lifespan filled chaos with it. The hatred and hubris for which the war took place in the form of the Furies. And this just continues onwards, says stuff like infinitely layered space-time, the concepts of life, death, and meaning. The Titan War giving birth to the Sisters of Fate, blah, 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 the creation of the universe. The point is that all of these statements not only are not consistent with the descriptions that are given in the actual game, this is also directly taken out of the artwork of the God of War Free art book, which I will be providing on the screen directly in the Chronos section. So not only can you tell that it's kind of faked and forged by the fact that you can't source it, and the information is extremely loaded, it's inconsistent with how dialogue is written, but it's also just stealing artwork. The next one is going to be very much the same way. It's a simple issue. It's from the Santa Monica Studio Twitter account, where it says Kratos and Atreus stood on a large force that contains set theory on a physical value and is metaphysical. Aside from the fact that this doesn't even give, like, a proper description of what that means, Santa Monica has never made a statement like this in regards to the God of War games. They've never talked with this specific language before. This is also not on their website or their Twitter. You can literally go, this is the exact date, and you won't be able to find this. Like this is fucking fake as hell. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. There's another statement with the Yggdrasil, which just refers to it as the a cosmic construct that is all beyond all time, space, reality, physics, and even metaphysics. A metaphysical tree which transcends shape, form, math, meaning, everything that is and which isn't. The tree of life is the apex figure in Norse epics. It supports and preserves all creation along its astronomical prose, as well as it transcends every conceptual dichotomy. So aside from the fact that word salad has never been mentioned anywhere in the source material and is extremely explicit and also technically vague at the same time because it doesn't elaborate on any of these terms. It just throws a bunch of fancy battle boarding terms next to one another. This scan is also faked because it's ripped directly from the God of War 4 art book. The same scan that I provided earlier when I was explaining that the Yggdrasil had an existing physical form, it literally rips the same artwork out. But you also can't source it. You can't back source it anywhere. So there's no reason for me to believe in it. The Temple of Helios stuff involving the darkness being the path to enlightenment. This basically says the exact same thing about the Greek Pantheon. These things are the embodiments of time, nature, they existed before time was, blah, 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 blah. It's the same statement, the same text, the same information. Has the same problem that the rest of these can't be sourced, can't be reverse searched, can't find the URL, can't find any of these things. You can't source this information at all. It can't be used. Its dialogue, much like the rest of these, is completely inconsistent with how descriptions are written. It's described in a way that is not consistent with the writing tools of most of the series. Like no sentence in any of the novels or the games or the guidebooks are ever described like this at all in any level of detail. Not in this level of detail. Not that this detail even gives you anything. Secondly, Bruno also confirms that this is fake. When someone asks if the scans, specifically if the scan for Temple of Helios is real, and he says this text has nothing to do with the story of Chains of Olympus, so this is made as well, or this is fan made as well. This is also in reference to him, someone asking if the Dawn of Creation scan, the one I just provided evidence for being faked, was fake. And he says, I answered this before, but this is not made by our studio. You can tell because concept and images from different games are being used. This is fan-made. Now, while Bruno is correct, you don't actually need direct artwork from a game or proof of direct artwork from a game to prove that something is forged. That just makes it incredibly easy to determine that something is forged. If the statement can't be sourced, is completely inconsistent with writing in the series, has no basis to exist in the context of the source material, aka it's completely inconsistent with all lore and information presented throughout the series, and you just can't provide a backlog for how to get to it, either in physical or digital media, and there's also no proof of it existing, then it doesn't exist and it's probably fake. And then the second one, or I guess the fifth one we have, is the World Pillar, the Tale of Creation. Basically says the same thing that all of the other ones say, which says that this is the infinite heavens stretching throughout all the mortal realm. Essentially seeks to balance the entire cosmology, and the Pillar's destruction would bring down Mount Olympus in the entire universe. This was told to me that this was supposed to be on the Chains of Olympus website. I have never been able to find any example of this existing or proof of this existing. No author has confirmed validity of this existence of this statement being a thing. I have not been able to source it. It's not been referenced anywhere. No language has been used in a similar context. Like there or otherwise. Same problem as the rest of these scans. It is completely fucking fabricated. There's no reason for me to believe this is real, because every single qualification of an evidence or a piece of evidence for why I would believe that it's forged would be every condition for why I could believe that this piece of information would have been manufactured has been met. Then the last one involves another statement that is alleged to have existed on God of War's website, 2018, where it just basically states that The Yggdrasil's tree branches endlessly stretch on either side, as in one of the innumerable cosmic burrows, which went well beyond and encompassed the countless sheets of reality stacked upon each other, with each sheet completely transcending the one below. So this one has been provided to me many times in the past couple of years, and I have not been able to find a single example of this existing on Santa Monica Studios websites in the year after or the years of this statement existing. I've never been able to sort this on Santa Monica Studios websites, even though people have told me that this existed, that this was real. It falls in the same conditions, it's described in the same language. Almost all of them argue or talk about this thing transcending the one below with this many sheets of reality, endlessly layered space-time, endlessly layered this. Innumerable examples, like language that is not thrown around as often as you might think in the God of War universe, especially not as frequently back to back as this one does. Now, for the fifth section, this is just going to be how to handle sourcing author statements, because I think I've probably covered it enough. But obviously, the easiest way to source a statement is just provide a link to it. If it's a direct physical copy of something, you just have to take a screenshot of it and then provide it to someone so that they can be sure, well, and some evidence that it obviously existed, maybe like a video or something. If it's a book, pretty obvious to do that. If it's a Twitter statement or some online statement, it's fine as long as you have a domain that you can come back to, you can reverse search it. If you can't, and you have to start by using Wayback Machine, if you can't find any Wikipedia source or site or anything that confirms it, or if you have reason to believe that it might not be real because it falls under a condition of, edited scans or edited like depths or dimensions of the photo, or any sort of like artwork ripped from any source material, then you probably shouldn't be using it at all. Now, an author statement, just like any other source, can't be used if you can't source it. And here's where I'm going to explain the difference between like an author DM versus an author's public statement, because people seem to be under the impression that you can source or use an author DM as well as an author public statement. This is not true, because an author DM doesn't actually have a link back to it. You have to have the original account. So if you're screenshotting to me a conversation that you had with Corey Barlog, I can't actually confirm if you directly had that conversation unless that's confirmed by both parties that the conversation was privy to, which is extremely difficult to do when the main people who are trying to prove this just want to show me a statement that is like, here's a conversation I had with Corey Barlog. And it's like, okay. And I'll provide some examples on screen to show this. Ones where it's supposed to be the real Corey Barlog talking about God of War's Earth. Aside from the fact that the statements that are presented here in this example are completely inconsistent with what he says, and as I pointed out, he already believes that the world is just one universe. There is the issue that there's no link, like you can't provide a link to this DM at all. I would need to see this person's like contact information or some like something that can be used to verify this. And also for anyone who might be wondering if there's any sort of like invasion of privacy, if you're sourcing a direct DM from someone, presumably, you're technically giving up a capacity, some degree of privacy by literally providing a direct private message with you and a developer. So it's only right that I ask you for more information to verify that authenticity, especially if we've already gone through the fact that so many of these statements that have been provided from this community, spread out on various Discords, various YouTubes, various blogs, etc., are fake. There's no reason for me to believe something like this could exist. I mean, that's completely separate from the contents of the statements. Like what Corey says here, the real Corey Barlog, quote unquote, is that the quote actual God of War Earth geography is the same as our real Earth. The only difference is that between the two exists a geographical region. There exists a version of the universe with its dimensions and Earth inspired by the prevalent mythology and local belief systems that people living in that particular region. So I'd like to point out that that's refuted directly by the information I provided in section 1. They literally don't refer to as geography as quotation marks or a placeholder term for people's subjective reality creating something. They don't believe that the world is being shaped by people's belief systems. They just believe that people believe stuff, and that's it. They believe a myth that's been passed down, and that's it. Their myths and their beliefs are not literally shaping reality on a whim. The person responds by saying, okay, that makes sense. So we can essentially say that God of War is essentially a multiverse, and basically a geographical region is, every geographical region is basically a universe having a cosmology and a set of gods as per the belief system of those people living in the region. He basically says exactly, and he wanted to ask how, this person wanted to ask how Thor can punch the world serpent so hard it goes back in time. How can Gaia from the Great War know about Kratos and their deal, which took place thousands of years in the future? Do these gods have the power to transcend time? And then he says in the next scan, it has something to do with the fact that these deities exist on a higher realm, a higher plane in existence compared to the mortal realm. Mortal concepts like time and space don't have any power over them. They exist beyond such things. So someone had provided this statement to Bruno. I mean, aside from the fact that I wouldn't even use this because you can't source any of it for the reasons that I mentioned above, Bruno actually confirms in this Twitter statement that I'm going to provide here in this, like, an actual thread. He confirms the Santa Monica Studio Scripts thing that I provided initially was also, like, he just doesn't recognize it at all. Someone even presented that it might be fan-made. And then they asked if this is like a real or a fabricated statement. And Bruno says that account does not look official to me. So I'd like to point out that even without those direct statements, again, you don't need to directly get confirmation from an author to confirm this. It does obviously make it easy. I mean, obviously, if Bruno directly confirms the Pantheons are countries, rather than you having to cohesively grab like 5 pieces of evidence to prove that they are, obviously that's a little bit easier, but there are multiple ways to do something. There are also multiple examples of other author statements that I'm going to provide on screen. I'm not going to mention them in great detail because this video is far too long at this point. I'll just have like Bruno basically talking with this random person who is also like blacklisted on their messages with him. Same thing with Patrick Murphy. Same thing with Izzy. Same thing with Stig's private DM conversation with him, and then another fake Corey Barlog account as well. All of these statements fall under the definition of an unverified scan, because while I cannot conclusively prove that each one is fake in the sense that I can't provide you a direct statement from an author that says they're fake, at this moment, at the time of the recording of this video, understand there is no reason for me to believe they're real. There's no reason for a rational or logical person to pursue this unless they're just coping. Not only is the information for the person listed here blacklisted, you can't backsource or search any of these or use the Wayback Machine on any of these. You cannot find any of these pieces of information. You cannot even prove that they exist. None of them. Now, one final portion that I'm going to talk about before we get into, like, let's say, well, we'll get into the final section after this, the final subsection, and then we'll just give it a off and the video will end. I'm going to point out something that I've been wanting to talk about for some time, and that is the amount of cherry picking that has basically been committed by Versus Battle Wiki in regards to their God of War Cosmology blog. On their blog, in particular, they had provided, I believe, several statements in regards to how the cosmology was actually set up. And initially, I thought, when I first saw it many years ago, I thought, oh, this really looked like a nice little layout. Seems to conveniently explain everything all together. But they left out some context for 3 specific statements. The ones that I'm going to point out are rather obvious. That is obviously the ones that I've mentioned multiple times at this point, which is Bruno's statements of the retcons being a lazy way to out a story, Matt Sophos confirming the Mantis remarks on linearly, but the myths and interpretations are all valid, and then Corey's, his iconic statements of confirming that the universe, when talking about the universe, he's referring to the universes that they themselves have dominion over. So in every single one of those statements, there is a direct level of cherry picking that is conducted, because when you actually look up in the Twitter thread that Bruno provides where he talks about retcons, someone literally asks him, do you think each myth has its own reality/universe? I mentioned this before, but he says, in God of War, Greece and North exist in the same universe. It's like traveling to another country and seeing another culture. That is actually the reason why he says, I just hope they don't retcon the previous games, which which corresponds with the response from Bruno, where he says, "Why would we? This is a continuation of the saga. Retcons are lazy ways out to continue the story." If you actually check the thing on, I believe, the God of War explanation page, they did not actually have that full statement. In fact, all they actually have specifically is just John Hammerson's statement in the Twitter thing. And then they have everything up down to Poseidon being the god of all seas. They do not include the information just 4 messages above that directly refutes that entire position, because the position is being presented in the context of this idea that the God of War pantheons are, universes, that they are not countries. A little bit silly at this point of the video, I know. But they basically said that under this assumption that essentially the pantheons are created inside of this Hubble, basically this Doctor Who bigger on the inside assumption. Well, it's kind of weird to have that position while also having the contradictory evidence sitting inside of your same message thread that is conveniently omitted. The second example with Matt Sophos is the one that I mentioned where he mentioned that it's the realms are separated, not the realms are separated mythically. The pantheons are separated mythically rather than in the sci-fi dimensionality sense. This is also in the same blog that is provided to explain why the pantheons are separated from the pantheons are able to exist together. This directly debunks them existing as separate universes, because if they don't exist in a sci-fi dimensionality, they literally don't exist in a sci-fi context. So, then the Corey one that's provided, he literally says Midgar is Scandinavia on Earth, so he confirms they're the exact same place, also provided in the exact same scan, and he also says the greater actual universe. Initially, that blog, I think, had been updated where the greater actual universe line wasn't included. But the point is that you can refute that entire position, and it is completely cherry-picked on the blog. They completely ignore the rest of the information that refutes it. And in Bruno's case, they directly leave out a piece of information that refutes all of the information there. This is not a matter of negligence or incompetence, as I think some people will be inclined to believe that maybe I'm just being a little bit unreasonable. I can understand that for some of the statements that I provided, though there's an overwhelming preponderance of evidence on Twitter. I understand if you don't have the time to cover Bruno's statements, sure. But some of these statements are out there. They're there to find. But if you didn't find them, okay. It's one thing to not find the statement at all. It's another thing entirely to find a statement, to look at a statement directly with your eyeballs on your screen, and not miss a message that is 4 messages above in the same thread and say, well, I just conveniently happen to only include half of the conversation somehow. I'm sorry, but negligence and incompetence doesn't work that way. That's just malicious. You can't incompetently only include half the message. There's no way you wouldn't have the rest of that. The way Twitter functions is that the full thread is brought down when you're including it, unless the tweets have been deleted or hidden or something like that. You can see the full message. Someone would have had to link that statement by looking at it and just conveniently ignored it, or didn't bother to include any of the information there. Same goes with the rest of these statements, but Bruno's is the most explicit example of cherry picking, because there's direct counter evidence to that. Sorry, I just had to point that out. Got a little heated because that was just egregious, to say the least. Now, we have our final part of the author section before we finish up with the video, which is talking about the basically just showing up some silly questions. This was going to be covering us talking about the importance of invalid questions, how to spot ones that can't be validly used for What a God. But I ultimately realized that at this point, I think I've kind of already hit the ball home. I'll probably add more information about this later at some point or some section. So I'm sure you'll be able to find it. For this, it's ultimately, I just need you guys to see some of these statements, because it's not really, these do need to be said in the video, I would say, because many of them are in regards to the same subjects and stuff that are presented, and I couldn't find a way for them to be put into the main sections, because a lot of them are just so very silly. So we start with the first one, which should be on the screen at this point in time, which is, this one's going to be in Spanish, so I'll find the translation for you right here. Or basically, someone asked if why is the shield of Helios also called the shield of the sun? Is it the same object or are they different? Also, if it's the same, why are they called different? And when Helios died, the primordial fire was extinguished? Question mark. Bruno responds by saying, it seems as if they are the same shield. I don't know if the name is different in the Spanish version, but since Helios is the god of the sun, it makes sense that it could be called the shield of the sun as well. When the sun died, it went out in the sky of Greece. That obviously confirms that technically he only supports the sun in the context of the Greece. He does not support the sun wide, he just supports the sun over Greece. So that's why it goes out in the sky. Not an indication of any sort of like separate reality or anything. It's just the same country being affected by his direct powers. This one is a bit of a different statement. This is from the Who Would Win channel, Twitter. Now, for some reason, I don't know why this happened. Normally, I wouldn't include one of these things, but Santa Monica Studios' direct Twitter account was asked to, well, I guess they didn't ask to respond to this. They got directly involved in this between a matchup between the Phoenix and, or Jean Grey Phoenix and Kratos. And they actually directly tweeted Cory Barlog and Matt Sophos and asked them to mention and, I guess, enter the party here, basically speak on the subject for us. And Matt Sophos basically says what his response is that I think, depending on which version of the characters we're talking about, one of them might take the win. If it's in the original tweet, I'll give the win to Kratos, and I'll tell you why. Number one is that Jean has always been able to control the Phoenix Force when she needs to. The potential death toll got high enough. I think Jean would step in and not allow it to cause too much damage or too much loss of life. Kratos, however, has never cared too much about collateral damage. Basically, I'm betting on Jean's humanity. And number three is that if we're talking about pure unbridled Phoenix Force without Jean as the anchor, well, it's destroyed entire solar systems, so I think that's a tougher hill for Kratos to climb. Both have shown they won't stay dead for long, but Kratos does need a planet to come back to. Which technically confirms that Kratos obviously can't breathe in space, and two, he technically can die to a solar system buster. I know some people are going to say, well, that's a versus matchup regarding other characters. Well, this is a writer directly confirming what his character can do after he was directly asked to do so by the Twitter account of his boss at the time. I think it is fair game to at least consider it, because that's interesting. And then in one of the statements that I mentioned above, where someone confirmed that someone asked Bruno if they could confirm whether the Donna creation scan was real, one of the people in the thread basically asked if Kratos was beyond all dimensionality. This is a silly conversation, but I'll provide it anyway. And then the fans are basically like, if Bruno says, yes, Kratos is totally broken. He says, indeed, that's the only true answer we need. And Bruno says, I don't even know what that means, Lo. Kratos is just a demigod living on the earth. And this guy basically asked him, spatial dimensions, Bruno. Basically, every dimensional axis that exists in the universe. 1D, 2D, 3D, 4D, 5D, etc. What we ask is if Kratos is above all these. To which Bruno just flatly responds, no. And then one of the guys that's in the question in the thread basically asks, I don't think he understands, is he above Platonic concepts? It's a power scaling question, sir. We're asking if you would say that Kratos is powerful enough to go beyond any dimensionality. A more simple way is if Kratos is beyond all Platonic concepts. Bruno says, no, he's not. He says, that's disappointing, but he's a god. God should be above Platonic concepts. And then Bruno says, yeah, Kratos is anything but an abstract object. So you can't really say that that's like, I know some people will probably think it's a little loaded. It is a little loaded for them to assume a lot of those statements. The problem is that when they clarified the statements, what they were referring to, Bruno just confirms flat out that like he's not above these things. He doesn't exist as these things. He's also able to confirm what Platoism is in regards to abstracts. So I think the answer can probably at least be considered, even though it's a little ridiculous for someone to be asking him that question. Someone had also asked him if Kratos flipped all of existence in 2018, or is the temple not as heavy as existence? And then Bruno just confirmed that he flipped the temple instead of existence. So again, just people misunderstanding how the God of War cosmology typically works. Nothing new. And someone asked Bruno, as they're a fan of the God of War games, if there's higher dimensions in God of War, like Athena reaching a higher dimension. And Bruno says, well, in God of War, it does seem like there is some kind of beyond for gods such as Athena. And then he asked the question, so are there higher dimensions, 5D, 6D, 7D, 8D, and so on in God of War? And he didn't get a response, but he did get a response from one of the great God of War guys out there on YouTube, being Kev, who basically told him to shut the fuck up, which is an interesting response. Almost as if he didn't want him to hear an answer to that. I mean, I can see why, after going through all of Bruno's statements. This is very much an Encanto moment where we don't want to talk about what Bruno has to say. I think I have a couple more statements and then we'll be moving on to the last portion. Yes, about two more. So someone basically asked, if at what age did you realize that the Oracle of Athens lied that the only weapon able to kill a god was Pandora's box, but the weapon that actually killed Ares was the Blade of the Gods? This made me wonder why the gods created this weapon and where it is now. And Bruno says, my friend, the Oracle did not lie. Pandora's box was the key to making Kratos grow to the Ares' size and gave him the strength to fight a god. Kratos could have used anything at that point: a shovel, a piece of the statue, his fist, etc. Kratos was the true god-slaying weapon. He says, so it doesn't matter that he's using the Blades of Chaos and he could kill the god with the power of Pandora's box, right? He says, exactly. And then someone responds saying, Persephone was a goddess and she died years before Kratos opened the box. And he says, right, but she did not turn giant like Ares, so Kratos did not need the box in that instance. Which certainly means the box doesn't actually give him any, unique powers in his fight with Ares. It just made him larger. Just manipulated his size. Someone also asked if when he battles with Atropus, the sword suffers damage and eventually we will lose the fight if the sword will break and giant Kratos will lose the battle with Ares. This sword is an important piece in that final battle with Ares, so giant Kratos must kill Ares with that sword, right? Because in God of War 2, it is, because it's how he used it in God of War 1. But when it first happened, he did not need to use the sword. Which basically means the only reason he's using it in God of War 2, in particular, is because in that scene, he used the sword to kill Ares at the time because Ares had taken away his weapons, but the actual weapon was not needed, which explains why Ares is killed, or why Kratos gets killed by Ares in God of War 2, that if the blade gets destroyed, essentially you can kill the past version of Kratos, which also technically means he doesn't have multiple different forms of a causality as well, because you can kill him in the past, or you can even kill an object tied to something that he used to affect his fate or carry out an action, and that will also kill Kratos depending on the object. You don't even actually have to kill Kratos. You shouldn't really kill a weapon that Kratos has or an object that Kratos has, and you can also just kill Kratos, which is very interesting. And after that, I was going to mention some statements revolving Odin and Zeus, but I think that's probably enough for now. And we finally have just final thoughts. Overall, I think it's pretty much all we have to talk about. This video took a long time to make. Thank you for anyone who's actually sitting around for this whole discussion in general. This is, again, just video number 1. Video number 2 is going to be covering God of War Ragnarok, and that video will just entail 2 separate sections where I'm mainly just covering a bunch of the scans that are included, and then the second section will just cover what the scans entail and counter scans and lore. Most people are really interested in that, so I will provide it. Unless Zim has anything to say, I believe we are done here.